The wild looks beautiful, right up until someone forgets why it's called the wild. Hi, it's Christopher, and in this video, I'm looking at families that were devoured by deadly animals, from a father who kidnapped his children and took them to crocodile-infested waters at night, to a couple who led their family through a safari fence, searching for the perfect anniversary photo. But first, a family of vloggers who turned a lion feeding site into their final stunt. It was August 17th, 2017, a dry winter evening inside a private game reserve near Hoedspruit, South Africa. The last light of sunset stretched across the bushveld, while dust from passing safari vehicles drifted slowly through the cooling air. Guides across the reserve were tracking final predator sightings before darkness forced most vehicles back toward camp. Alejandro Vargas was 38 years old and ran a family YouTube channel with his wife Isabella and their children, 17-year-old Valeria and 15-year-old Diego. At their peak, the channel attracted millions of subscribers through pranks, luxury travel content, and staged emotional videos. By mid-2017, the audience had collapsed. Sponsors pulled away after repeated accusations that their videos were fabricated, and monthly views continued dropping. The South Africa trip was planned specifically to revive the channel. For weeks, Alejandro promoted the safari online as the most dangerous family vlog ever filmed and promised subscribers real wilderness with no safety barriers. Reserve staff had repeated throughout the trip that guests were never to exit safari vehicles near predators under any circumstances. Alejandro treated every warning as an exaggeration, said to make newer tourists scared. I want to say something here. He promoted this trip for weeks as the most dangerous family vlog ever filmed. He wasn't caught off guard. He was looking for exactly this. On the third evening, their guide located a lion pride feeding beside a partially eaten wildebeest carcass roughly 90 feet from the road. 2 adult lionesses remained alert nearby, while younger lions fed. The guide parked at a safe distance and told the group they would stay briefly to avoid disturbing the animals. Alejandro became immediately frustrated with the footage. The lions looked too small on camera, and livestream comments began mocking the video and accusing the family of faking the danger. He opened the Jeep door without warning. Wanting to stir up some action, he pulled several pieces of raw meat from a cooler beneath his seat and stepped onto the dirt road, carrying them openly in his hand. One lioness rose from the grass almost instantly. Another lifted her head sharply from the carcass and stared directly toward him. Their tails dropped low while the younger lions stopped feeding. The guide began shouting immediately and ordered Alejandro back inside the vehicle. But Alejandro laughed toward Isabella's camera and told the audience the lions were just curious. He insisted big cats only attacked people who ran. Diego was crying inside the Jeep. Valeria was screaming. And Alejandro was explaining lion behavior to a live stream audience. I genuinely cannot reconcile those two things happening at the same time. Inside the Jeep, Diego began crying. Valeria screamed that the lions were moving closer. One lioness began circling slowly through the grass, completely focused on the meat in Alejandro's hand. Then she accelerated. Lionesses can cover 30 feet in under a second from a standing start. They target the neck and throat in a single closing rush, using body weight and momentum to drive prey to the ground before applying a suffocating bite. There is no meaningful reaction window once the charge begins. The lioness covered the distance before Alejandro could reach the door. The impact drove him sideways against the vehicle with enough force to knock Isabella's camera from her hands. The guide accelerated hard through the brush, while Diego pulled at the rear door. A subadult male ran alongside the moving Jeep and swiped at the partially open doorway before falling back. Rangers responding to emergency radio calls located the Jeep nearly 20 minutes afterward, several hundred yards off the main trail. Multiple lions were still present in the area when armed staff arrived. Alejandro Vargas was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner recorded his cause of death as hemorrhagic shock resulting from severe traumatic injuries to the neck and upper body, including crush trauma and major vascular damage consistent with a large felid attack. The partial live stream footage was removed from the family's channel within hours of the incident, and the video was taken down. Investigators confirmed that Alejandro had ignored repeated safety instructions issued throughout the duration of the visit. Officials stated that carrying raw meat on foot near an active feeding site likely intensified the lion's response and contributed directly to the attack. The reserve was reviewed by South African wildlife authorities, but no citations were issued against the facility. Staff were found to have followed correct safety protocols throughout. Isabella Vargas returned to South Africa several weeks later, collected Alejandro's remains, and arranged for his body to be repatriated for burial. The family's channel was not updated again following the incident. He built a channel around stage danger and finally found the real version. The fact that stayed with me the most is that he never got to see his viral moment. His audience got exactly what he promised them. Alejandro stepped out of that Jeep carrying raw meat near an active feeding site because the comments were mocking him. But Martín, I sincerely think this is unsettling. He took his children into crocodile water in the dark and never came back out. It was the 14th of November 2018, deep inside the flooded mangrove estuaries, south of Australia's Northern Territory coastline. Heavy monsoon rain hammered the waterways, while thick storm clouds buried the moon completely, leaving the channels in near total darkness. Rising tides pushed muddy currents through narrow mangrove passages, where visibility barely extended beyond the boat itself. Martín Vega was 38 years old and had spent years operating a small commercial fishing business along the coast before declining catches, mounting debts, and mechanical failures destroyed what remained of it. By early 2018, the business had collapsed entirely. His marriage to Lucia Herrera had ended in March 2017 after years of financial pressure and escalating arguments. Lucia relocated with their children to a rental property near Darwin and pursued full custody through the courts. By November 2019, temporary protection orders had already been granted following several confrontations outside the children's school. The final custody hearing on November 12th ruled strongly in Lucia's favor. Martín was expected to lose unsupervised access to the children entirely within days pending psychiatric evaluation. On the afternoon of November 13th, he collected 14-year-old Tomas and 15-year-old Emilia, telling Lucia he was taking them on a short overnight fishing trip, but he never brought them back. Instead, Martín kept his phone switched off, avoided fuel stations, and piloted an aging 30-foot houseboat deep into isolated mangrove channels rarely entered unless it's crabbing season. He told Lucia it was a short overnight fishing trip. He had already switched his phone off before he left the dock. I keep thinking about that sequence. But what happened next was quite inevitable. As the hours passed, his behavior became increasingly erratic. He checked the shoreline constantly with a flashlight, whispered when distant boat engines echoed through the estuary, and warned the children repeatedly to stay quiet because people were looking for them. Neither child slept. This children spent the whole night watching their father check the shoreline with a flashlight and whisper about people looking for them. That is the part of this case I found hardest to sit with. Shortly after midnight, the houseboat engine failed after the propeller became tangled in submerged mangrove debris carried by the rising tide. The vessel drifted helplessly through flooded black channels surrounded by dense mangrove roots while the rain continued falling. Around 2 a.m., Tomas noticed two dim orange reflections sitting low across the channel near the mangrove roots. Then another pair appeared farther back, then another. The crocodiles remained almost entirely submerged, moving silently around the drifting vessel for nearly an hour. Sometimes their eyes disappeared completely beneath the surface before reappearing closer to the boat. Saltwater crocodiles are the largest living reptiles on Earth and among the most dangerous ambush predators in existence. Adults in the Northern Territory regularly exceed 14 feet in length and are known to patrol flooded estuaries at night, investigating boats, food smells, and movement near the waterline. Their strike is one of the fastest attacks of any large animal, initiated almost entirely from beneath the surface with almost no visible warning. Just before dawn, the current pushed the houseboat hard against a muddy bank. Martín climbed overboard into the dark water with a rope tied around his waist and attempted to push the bow free manually. The water reached his upper thighs near the bank. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the surface beside him exploded. The crocodile struck from below and seized him sideways in a single movement. Tomas later told investigators he barely saw the animal itself. The rope snapped against the hull before jerking loose seconds later. Martín screamed once, violent thrashing erupted deeper among the mangrove roots as the crocodile dragged him through the flooded channel. The attack lasted less than 30 seconds before the estuary went silent again. I still don't understand what exactly was going on in his mind before he made this decision. I've read a lot of these cases. That rope detail is the one I couldn't put down. The children remained trapped inside the tilted houseboat alone for several more hours. Search helicopters located the vessel the following morning. Both children were found alive, suffering from dehydration, shock, and mild hypothermia. Martin Vega's remains were never fully recovered. The medical examiner listed his cause of death as fatal traumatic injuries and drowning consistent with a saltwater crocodile attack, with death likely occurring within seconds of the initial strike due to catastrophic vascular trauma and submersion. Martin took his children into the dark and didn't come back. But Raphael? This one I didn't want to add it to this list at first. He tossed fish scraps into the water, with his boys swimming beside the boat after two fishermen had already warned him. It was February 18, 2017, a calm summer afternoon along the southern coastline of Western Australia, near Esperance. Clear skies and unusually warm weather had drawn dozens of recreational boats, divers, and tourists onto the water throughout the day. The ocean remained remarkably clear, despite light swells rolling in from deeper water beyond the rocky island chain offshore. Rafael Moreira was 39 years old and had spent most of his adult life working as a marine engineer aboard dredging and supply vessels across Southeast Asia and Northern Australia. A 6-month offshore contract near Indonesia in 2016 had kept him away from home almost entirely. By the time he returned, his marriage to Camilla had grown strained, and his sons, 12-year-old Lucas and 13-year-old Tiago, barely spoke to him comfortably anymore. Rafael planned what he called a real father and sons weekend. On the morning of February 18th, he rented a small motorboat and took the boys several miles offshore near a chain of rocky islands popular with fishermen and divers. His years at sea had made him extremely confident around the ocean. He repeatedly told the boys there was nothing in the water he could not handle. During the previous week, several local fishermen had reported increased shark activity around the islands. Fish waste discarded offshore by commercial vessels was believed to have drawn large sharks closer to recreational boating areas. Around mid-afternoon, two fishermen passed near the rented boat and warned Rafael they had spotted a large shark moving through the area earlier that day. One of them called out for the boys to stay close to the boat, 6 months offshore away from his family, and this was the weekend he chose to prove something to his sons. I want to be fair. I understand that impulse. I just wish he had not did the next thing. Rafael dismissed the warning and laughed it off. He tossed leftover fish scraps into the water beside the boat while explaining to the boys that great whites rarely attacked humans. After a while, small fishes gathered quickly near the surface. Minutes later, Tiago spotted a dark shape moving beneath the water farther from the boat and asked to climb back on board. Rafael told him the shark was probably just passing through. Lucas stayed in the water near the swim ladder. Then the surface erupted beside him. A large, great white shark surged from below with explosive force. Water crashed across the side of the boat as Lucas was pulled under in a violent surge of white water. Rafael lunged toward the ladder while Tiago scrambled back on board screaming. Lucas resurfaced farther from the boat, crying for help. Hearing his son's cry, Rafael jumped into the water immediately and swam toward Lucas as crew members shouted for both of them to return to the boat. Rafael reached within a few feet of the child when the shark struck again from below. Several people on nearby boats later described a violent surge of white water before both disappeared beneath the surface almost instantly. Neither was recovered alive. Great white sharks attack from below at speed with little surface warning. A single strike generates enough force to cause fatal injury instantly. I've thought about this moment more than anything else in this case. He dove in without hesitating. I don't know whether that makes it harder or easier to read. Both, maybe. Nearby fishermen and a passing tour vessel reached the scene within minutes after hearing the screams. Rescue crews arrived shortly after, but neither Rafael nor Lucas survived. The medical examiner recorded both causes of death as fatal hemorrhagic shock resulting from catastrophic traumatic injuries consistent with a large shark attack, including severe lacerations, crush trauma, and major vascular damage sustained during repeated strikes. Santiago survived with minor physical injuries and was returned to the care of his mother, Camila Moreira. Authorities temporarily closed nearby beaches while marine officials monitored shark activity around the islands. Investigators later found that swimming near fishing activity, discarding fish scraps into the water, and ignoring warnings from nearby fishermen likely increased the risk of attracting large sharks into the area. Officials stated the attack appeared consistent with natural predatory behavior. His son never went near an ocean. Rafael dove into shark-infested water after his son without a second thought. But Nadia? I had a hard time processing this one. She ducked under a safety railing in Katmai with her daughter beside her because she thought the cub looked harmless. It was July 9th, 2016, a warm summer afternoon inside Katmai National Park, Alaska. Peak salmon season had drawn hundreds of tourists onto the crowded wooden observation platforms overlooking the fast-moving river below. Nadia Belkacem was 41 years old and worked remotely as a customer service coordinator for an insurance company based in Phoenix, Arizona. She had planned the trip as a birthday gift for her daughter Lena after years of following bear content online. She regularly reposted videos of people interacting peacefully with rescued bears and frequently complained that wild animals were unfairly portrayed as dangerous. Rescued bears and wild bears are not the same animal. I want to be honest. She had built an entire belief system around that confusion, and she brought her daughter into the park carrying it. From the moment they entered the park, rangers issued clear warnings about staying on marked trails and never approaching bears, especially cubs. Nadia dismissed most of the briefings as exaggerated fear designed to control tourists. That afternoon, visitors lined the observation platform quietly, photographing several bears feeding below the riverbank. Lena spotted a small cub near the edge of the brush, a short distance from the boardwalk. Excited voices spread through the crowd. A ranger reacted immediately, ordering everyone to move back from the railings while scanning the nearby tree line for the mother. The cub paced nervously beside the brush and made soft cries toward the trees behind it. Nadia pulled out her phone. She told Lena quietly that the cub looked harmless and complained that people always overreacted around bears. While other tourists backed away, she ducked beneath the safety railing and stepped off the marked viewing area. Lena followed beside her. The ranger began shouting immediately and moved toward them, ordering Nadia back onto the platform, warning her the sow was likely nearby even if nobody could see it yet. Nadia kept filming and told Lena that bears were protective animals, not monsters the way everyone claimed. Before the ranger could physically reach them, the cub rose onto its hind legs and cried loudly toward the trees. The ranger was shouting at her. The cub was crying toward the trees, and she was explaining bear behavior to her daughter. This is where things went wrong, and I don't think she ever saw it coming. The sow came out of the brush almost instantly. Brown bears defending cubs do not bluff. A protective charge from a sow with young nearby is a direct attack. Brown bears in Katmai regularly exceed 600 pounds and can accelerate to 30 miles per hour across open ground in seconds. There is no meaningful distance a person on foot can cover before the animal closes. Witnesses said the bear crossed the open ground so quickly that many tourists on the platform did not fully understand what was happening until screaming erupted around them. Rangers shouted for everyone to retreat while people collided along the narrow boardwalk, trying to reach the exits. Nadia stumbled backward and grabbed Lena's arm, attempting to pull her toward the trail. The sow reached them before they moved more than a few feet. The bear struck Nadia first, driving her to the ground with the full force of the impact. The attack was direct and concentrated. Lena was knocked down in the same movement, but was not the primary focus of the bear's aggression. Park rangers moved in immediately with bear spray and managed to drive the sow back within seconds, allowing emergency crews to reach the scene and secure the area. Nadia was transported by emergency services to the nearest trauma facility. She had sustained catastrophic injuries to her head, neck, and upper torso, including severe crush trauma, deep lacerations, and major vascular damage caused by the initial strike and subsequent contact with the ground. She died before reaching the hospital. The medical examiner recorded her cause of death as hemorrhagic shock resulting from multiple severe traumatic injuries, consistent with a large bear attack. Lena survived with non-life-threatening injuries and was treated at a nearby medical facility before being released into the care of family. Lena was right beside her when it happened. I kept thinking about what it means to survive something like that at whatever age Lena was. I couldn't find a way to finish that thought. Investigators confirmed Nadia had ignored repeated direct warnings seconds before leaving the protected viewing platform. Wildlife officials stated the sow's response was consistent with standard defensive maternal behavior in brown bears protecting cubs at close range. Nadia ducked under a safety railing because she thought she understood bears better than the rangers did. But the person brought his whole family to Kenya for their anniversary and led them through a gap in the camp fence before sunrise. It was August 14th, 2016, a foggy winter morning inside a private conservancy bordering the Masai Mara in Kenya. Thin mist drifted through the acacia woodland, while damp grass and soft earth muffled movement across the bush before sunrise. Tran Minh Quan Walker was 51 years old and worked as a wealthy real estate developer from Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. He had met his wife, Nguyen Thu Ha Walker, nearly 20 years earlier during a safari vacation in Kenya. Ha was 48 and worked as a luxury travel consultant. Together, they described that first trip as the beginning of their entire life together. Their 2 teenage children had grown up hearing the story repeated across 2 decades. For their 20th wedding anniversary, Quan brought the family back to Kenya to recreate the experience and renew their vows where they first met. Lodge staff had arranged a ceremony inside a protected viewing area near camp, but Quan wanted something more private. Guests had been repeatedly instructed never to leave camp boundaries without armed Maasai guides, especially before sunrise when elephants and predators moved through the conservancy. Before dawn, Quan waited until the final patrol vehicle disappeared along the outer service road before leading his family quietly through a gap near the edge of camp. He waited for the patrol to leave. That detail tells me everything about how deliberate this was. He knew exactly what the rules were and planned around them. They carried backpacks with flower garlands, champagne, camera equipment, and a tripod. After nearly 40 minutes walking through waist-high grass and scattered acacia scrub, they spotted a young elephant calf feeding near a dry riverbed. It appeared to be alone. Tall grass and dense brush concealed most of the surrounding woodland. Their daughter began filming, while Quan positioned the tripod and Ha unpacked flowers beside the clearing. Then the calf stopped feeding. Its trunk rose high into the wind. A low vibration rolled through the ground beneath their feet. Branches cracked somewhere behind the acacia trees. African elephants move in tight family units and respond to perceived threats near calves with coordinated defensive charges. A charging adult elephant weighing over 10,000 pounds and moving at 15 miles per hour cannot be outrun on open ground. Matriarchs leading herd defense charges do not stop. One adult elephant emerged slowly through the brush with its head raised. Another appeared farther left through the grass, while deep rumbles rolled across the riverbed. Ha told Quan they needed to leave immediately. He insisted the elephants were only trying to scare them away from the calf. I want to be fair to Quan. He had been to Kenya before, and nothing had gone wrong. But Ha was right, and he wasn't listening. The matriarch stepped fully into the clearing, with her ears spread wide, and advanced several deliberate steps toward the family. Their younger child turned and ran. The matriarch charged immediately. She crossed the clearing faster than the family could react. Quan shouted for everyone to move toward the trees, but the ground near the dry riverbed was uneven, and the grass slowed their movement. Ha stumbled beside the tripod as the matriarch reached them. The elephant struck Quan first, driving him violently across the clearing with a single impact. Several adults closed ranks behind the matriarch, while the herd clustered tightly around the calf. Dust and screaming filled the riverbed as the elephants pushed through the area. Safari guides who had been searching for the missing family spotted the agitated herd from several hundred meters away and held their position to avoid escalating the defensive response further. Emergency teams were radioed, while vehicles remained at a distance until the herd settled. Quan Walker was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner recorded his cause of death as fatal blunt force trauma and internal hemorrhage, consistent with a large elephant strike, including multiple rib fractures, thoracic crush injuries, and catastrophic internal bleeding caused by the impact. Ha and both children survived with injuries and were treated at a nearby medical facility. Wildlife officials stated the matriarch's response was consistent with standard herd defense behavior after a calf was approached on foot at close range outside protected safari boundaries. He brought his family back to where they fell in love to renew their vows. Ha and the children watched him die in that clearing. I don't know how you carry that home. Quan led his family through a gap in the fence before sunrise because he wanted something more personal than the ceremony the lodge arranged. But the last person won those tickets in a competition. It was the first real vacation his family ever took. It was June 3rd, 2015, a wet afternoon inside Pilanesberg National Park, South Africa. Several days of heavy rain had turned the park's secondary dirt routes into deep mud, and rangers had spent most of the morning warning self-drive visitors to stay on marked roads. Sifo Dlamini was 44 years old and worked long shifts loading delivery trucks at a warehouse outside Johannesburg. His wife Thandi, 39, cleaned offices during overnight shifts at a private hospital. The family had 3 children and for years balanced overdue utility bills, school costs, and unreliable transport inside a cramped apartment. The safari trip was the first real vacation the family had ever taken together. A regional radio station had partnered with a tourism company to offer discounted safari packages to lower-income families. Sifo had entered the competition repeatedly for months before winning reduced-price tickets and a basic self-drive accommodation package. He told relatives and co-workers in the weeks before the trip that his children would finally experience something people like them never got to see. By the second day inside the park, Sifo had grown frustrated with how controlled the experience felt. Rangers had repeatedly reminded visitors to stay inside vehicles, avoid restricted tracks, and keep distance from dangerous animals. That afternoon, he attempted to use a muddy secondary track that had recently been closed after the rain. The rented SUV slid sideways off the road and sank deep into thick mud beside a grassy clearing. Roughly 150 feet away, a large black rhino grazed near low brush. Sifo tried reversing repeatedly, but the tires only spun deeper into the ground. Thandi told him to stop and stay inside. A passing safari vehicle noticed the stranded family and radioed park authorities. Rangers reached Sifo by cell phone and instructed everyone to remain locked inside the SUV until a recovery vehicle arrived. Sifo grew visibly embarrassed as other safari vehicles slowed in the distance to observe the stuck SUV. He told Thandi that waiting made the family look helpless in front of the children. This is the moment that changed everything, and I understand it more than I want to. He didn't want his children to see him look helpless. That feeling cost him everything. Despite her repeated objections, he climbed out into the mud and attempted pushing the vehicle free himself. Nothing moved. Covered in mud and increasingly angry, Sifo began shouting toward the rhino and waving his arms. He picked up loose gravel and clumps of wet dirt from the roadside and threw them across the clearing in the animal's direction, apparently trying to drive it away from the vehicle. Over the phone, a ranger ordered him to get back inside immediately and warned him that black rhinos were unpredictable and reacted aggressively to shouting, sudden movement, and perceived threats. Sifo kept shouting while backing slowly toward the driver's door. Black rhinos have poor eyesight, but acute hearing and a strong threat response to noise and movement near their territory. Adults weigh between 2,000 and 3,000 pounds and can accelerate to over 30 miles per hour with almost no warning. The rhino stopped grazing, its head lifted sharply. For several seconds, it stood motionless, facing directly toward the SUV. Then, it turned fully and charged. Sifo appeared to believe initially it was a bluff. By the time he realized it was not, he was already slipping in the mud trying to reach the door. He managed to pull himself partially inside the vehicle as the rhino slammed into the side of the SUV with its full body weight. The impact rocked the vehicle violently sideways. A side window shattered immediately as mud and broken glass sprayed across the interior. The rhino continued snorting and circling the immobilized SUV while the family screamed inside. Sifo had been partially inside the vehicle at the moment of impact. The door crushed inward against him during the strike. He sustained severe crush injuries to his lower torso and pelvis, multiple rib fractures, and internal bleeding caused by the compression between the door frame and the animal's body weight. Responding rangers approaching from a nearby service road held their position until additional units arrived and used their vehicles to pressure the rhino away from the scene. Emergency crews extracted the family once the area was secured. Sifo Dlamini was transported to a nearby medical facility, but did not survive his injuries. The medical examiner recorded his cause of death as hemorrhagic shock resulting from severe blunt force and compressive trauma to the torso and pelvis consistent with a large animal impact. Thandi and the 3 children survived. Wildlife officials stated the rhino's response was consistent with a defensive territorial reaction, triggered by aggressive human behavior, outside the safety of the vehicle. He won those tickets to show his children something they had never seen. They saw it. That's the last thing I keep coming back to in this case, and I can't find a way past it.